failure is often an illusion. What we call failure is the shadow of our own self-sabotage, born from unconscious fears and unrecognized desires. When we encounter setbacks in life, we immediately give them the name of failure. We tell ourselves that we are not good enough, that life has chosen to deny us, or that the world is unfair. Yet beneath this story lies something far more intimate, far more unsettling. The realization that what feels like failure is not an external punishment, but an internal creation. It is the shadow of our own psyche, the hidden force within us that quietly interferes with our progress, whispering doubts and feeding hesitation. What appears as failure on the surface often arises from the sabotage we enact against ourselves. There exists within every individual a conflict between the conscious self and the hidden, unconscious layers of the mind. The conscious part believes it seeks success, growth, and transformation. Yet beneath it, the unconscious may harbor fears, unresolved traumas, and deep uncertainties that resist change. This resistance manifests itself in subtle acts of self-sabotage, procrastination, indecision, perfectionism, or even attracting situations that reinforce our doubts. We mistake these moments as evidence that we are not capable, but in truth, they are symptoms of our psyche defending itself against transformation. The deeper mind does not always desire success, because success demands change, and change threatens the identity that we have long been attached to. When we experience this so-called failure, what we are truly experiencing is a clash of inner forces. One part of us strives toward growth and achievement, while another part clings to the safety of the familiar. The familiar may even be painful, yet it is known, and the unconscious mind prefers known suffering to unknown possibility. Thus, we sabotage ourselves not because we wish to fail, but because we fear what success will demand of us. Each act of sabotage is like a shadow cast on the path of our becoming, and we call that shadow failure. Consider the times when you set out to achieve something meaningful, but you delayed, you doubted, or you abandoned it halfway. Outwardly, you tell yourself that circumstances were against you, that others had more talent, more resources, or more opportunities. Inwardly, however, the truth remains. You stopped yourself before the world ever could. This is not failure in its true form. It is self-interruption, a fracture between what you desire and what you allow yourself to pursue. The name, failure, becomes a mask, concealing the deeper reality that you are the architect of the very walls you collide with. The shadow of sabotage is powerful because it works in silence. It is not always obvious. Sometimes it wears the face of laziness, sometimes of fear, sometimes even of logic and reason. We rationalize our retreat, telling ourselves it was not the right time, or that we are not ready, when in truth we are protecting ourselves from the unknown territories of growth. Failure, then, is rarely a true verdict on our capacity. It is instead the external expression of our hidden resistance, our reluctance to face what lies beyond the borders of our current self. The psyche carries within it a dual force, one striving for growth and individuation, the other clinging to comfort, fear, and old patterns that keep us small. Within every human being there is an ongoing struggle, a silent war between what we are meant to become and what we are afraid to release. On one side lies the energy of expansion, the natural urge of the psyche to move beyond limitation, to embrace transformation, and to discover deeper layers of the self. This is the voice that calls us toward dreams, toward challenges, toward the unknown horizon of possibility. On the other side lies the weight of the past, the gravitational pull of old habits, familiar pains, and inherited beliefs that bind us to what we already know. This force resists movement, resists uncertainty, and insists on safety, even if that safety is suffocating. This duality is not abstract, but lives in the daily choices we make. When you decide to act with courage, you align with the force of growth. When you hesitate out of fear, you surrender to the pull of comfort. This battle repeats itself in countless subtle ways: the decision to wake up early or to stay in bed, the choice to speak your truth or remain silent, the impulse to take a step toward your vision or to retreat into delay. The psyche does not sabotage us without reason. It does so because the part that clings to comfort believes it is protecting us. It interprets change as danger, and so it throws up barriers to keep us in the familiar prison. The struggle between these two forces is the essence of human growth. To evolve, one must first recognize that this tension exists within. We often think the enemy is outside, circumstances, people, or luck, but the real battlefield lies within the psyche itself. The drive for growth and the clinging to comfort are like two voices speaking simultaneously, and whichever voice you obey shapes your destiny. When the voice of growth is silenced by fear, the psyche does not collapse, but it does shrink. It contracts into old patterns, repeating the same loops, ensuring that you never move beyond what you have already experienced. This explains why so many people feel trapped, even when no physical barrier surrounds them. The prison is psychological, built of old stories and fears carried from childhood, from culture, from the collective memory of humanity itself. These inherited voices tell us not to risk, not to leap, not to change, and so we sabotage ourselves without even knowing it. Yet the force of growth never disappears. Even when suppressed, it stirs beneath the surface, appearing in dreams, in longings, in the quiet ache that tells you there is more to life than the routines you cling to. Every moment of hesitation, every act of sabotage is evidence of this dual force at work. One part of you is trying to rise, while another is holding you back. This conflict is not failure, but the natural consequence of being divided within yourself. To understand it is to see that your so-called failures are not judgments upon your worth, but reflections of this inner division. One force whispers, "Become," while the other whispers, "Stay safe." To move forward is to confront both voices and recognize their presence within you. Self-sabotage is not weakness, but the silent voice of the unconscious warning that we are afraid of transformation and responsibility. What appears on the surface as laziness, lack of discipline, or repeated failure is often misinterpreted. We look at our patterns of delay, our missed opportunities, and our avoidance of challenges and condemn ourselves as weak, flawed, or incapable. Yet weakness is not the true source of these behaviors. They arise from something deeper, the unconscious mind, which resists transformation because transformation demands that we relinquish the old self and step into the unknown. The unconscious does not sabotage to destroy us, it sabotages to protect us, to shield us from the weight of responsibility and the fear of becoming someone we have never been before. Every act of sabotage carries with it a hidden message. When you procrastinate, it may not be because you are lazy, but because your unconscious fears the consequences of success. Success would mean more expectations, more responsibilities, and a greater burden of sustaining what you have built. When you doubt yourself and retreat, it may not be because you lack ability, but because your unconscious is terrified of being exposed, of standing in the light where judgment and failure are possible. When you settle for less, it may not be because you lack vision, but because your unconscious convinces you that safety is found in smallness. That comfort is more important than growth. In every instance, the sabotage is a shield, a misguided attempt to keep you safe from the very transformation your conscious self longs for. To understand this is to see that self-sabotage is not the enemy, but a guardian that has confused its role. It is like a watchman who locks the gates, not realizing that the city inside is suffocating. It warns you of dangers that may not even exist, replaying old fears and past wounds as though they were inevitable in the future. It convinces you that stepping forward will lead to loss, humiliation, or collapse, and so it urges you to step back, to abandon your path before you can even test your strength. What appears as weakness is, in truth, a conflict between your conscious desire to grow and your unconscious attempt to protect what feels fragile within you. Transformation always carries with it the demand for responsibility. To become more than you are today requires that you take ownership of your choices, that you embrace uncertainty, and that you bear the consequences of becoming a new version of yourself. Responsibility is heavy, and the unconscious mind recoils from this weight. It prefers to keep you in familiar cycles where the burden of growth does not exist. That is why sabotage appears whenever you stand at the threshold of change. It is not weakness, but fear of responsibility disguised as protection. The closer you move toward becoming, the louder the voice of sabotage can grow, for it senses the threat to the patterns that have long defined your existence. This silent voice does not shout. It whispers in doubts, in hesitation, in small rationalizations that seem harmless at first. It tells you to rest a little longer, to wait for the perfect time, to prepare more before acting. But beneath these whispers is the same truth. You are afraid of transformation, afraid of the responsibility that will come when you cross the threshold into your higher self. What you mistake for failure is the battle with this voice, and what you call weakness is the refusal to see that sabotage is not there to destroy you, but to test whether you are willing to carry the responsibility of becoming who you are meant to be. Every time you delay, doubt, or retreat, it is not the world that blocks you. It is your inner resistance, your unseen self pulling the strings. We often look outward and blame the world for our lack of progress. We say circumstances are unfair, people do not support us, opportunities are rare, or that luck simply does not belong to us. But the truth is far more intimate and unsettling. The greatest barriers are not outside, they are within. The moments when you hesitate to take a step forward, when you second-guess your ability, or when you abandon the path altogether, are not dictated by external forces. They are manifestations of an internal resistance that prefers safety over growth and familiarity over transformation. This resistance is subtle, almost invisible to the conscious eye. It does not always arrive as a loud refusal. Instead, it disguises itself as hesitation, as overthinking, as careful planning that never reaches execution. You tell yourself you need more time, more preparation, more clarity, when in reality, these are the masks of fear. The resistance within you creates these diversions to ensure you remain where you are. It convinces you that the danger lies outside, when in truth, the obstacle stands in the form of your own inner self pulling the strings behind the curtain of your choices. The unseen self is not malicious, but it is powerful. It is the collection of memories, wounds, beliefs, and hidden fears that live in the unconscious. This self has learned from the past that risk brings pain, that change brings uncertainty, and that exposure brings the possibility of rejection. So it seeks to protect you by ensuring you never walk too far into the unknown. Every delay becomes a shield, every doubt a defense, every retreat a survival tactic. You believe you are failing because the world is against you, but in reality, you are wrestling with a silent part of yourself that has chosen to sabotage in order to preserve what it knows. Think of how many times you stood on the edge of a decision that could have changed your life, but you withdrew. The opportunity was there, the door was open, but you stepped back, telling yourself it was not the right moment. In those moments, the external world did not block you. You blocked yourself. You did not fail because society denied you. You failed because your own unseen self whispered warnings that paralyzed your action. This inner resistance is like an invisible puppeteer, pulling the strings of your behavior in ways you do not consciously recognize. The tragic irony is that what you call external failure is often self-created. When you tell yourself that you lack opportunities, you may actually be avoiding the opportunities that appear. When you say you are not ready, it may be that your unconscious resists the responsibility that readiness would demand. When you retreat from challenges, it may be less about the strength of the challenge and more about the depth of your own fear. The world, in many ways, is more open than you allow yourself to believe. It is not the external that blocks you, but the internal insistence that convinces you the external is stronger than it really is. This inner resistance thrives in silence. It rarely announces itself openly. It works through subtle gestures. The decision to check your phone instead of doing your work, the sudden fatigue when it is time to act, the endless distraction with trivial matters. You may believe these are harmless habits, but they are the fingerprints of your unseen self, ensuring you never confront the risk of growth. The most dangerous part of this is how convincingly it disguises itself as logic, caution, or rationality. You tell yourself you are being wise, when in truth you are being controlled by the very part of you that fears becoming more than you are today. To overcome sabotage, one must confront the shadow within, integrating the parts of the self that are fragmented, conflicted, and repressed. Every act of self-sabotage is a signal that there is a division inside you, a part of yourself that has not been brought into the light of awareness. This shadow is not only made of traits we dislike, but also of potentials we have buried, of strengths we have denied, and of memories we have not yet reconciled. It is a realm of both fear and possibility, and until it is faced, it will continue to interfere with our conscious attempts to grow. The shadow reveals itself in behaviors we cannot explain. Why do we abandon our goals just when they are within reach? Why do we return to destructive patterns even after promising ourselves we have changed? Why do we fear the very success we claim to want? These questions point toward the reality that part of our psyche is working against our conscious intentions. It resists because it has not been recognized, not been integrated. Instead of being accepted, it remains suppressed. And what is suppressed does not disappear. It influences us from beneath the surface. Confronting the shadow means daring to look at the parts of ourselves we often avoid. It means acknowledging our fears of rejection, our hidden anger, our unresolved grief, our hunger for validation, our avoidance of responsibility. These are the roots of sabotage. They operate invisibly until we are willing to bring them into awareness. Integration does not mean eliminating them, but understanding them, holding them, and allowing them to have a voice without letting them dominate. When we integrate the shadow, we are no longer divided against ourselves. The energy that once fueled sabotage is transformed into strength and clarity. The shadow also contains the positive qualities we are afraid to claim. We may fear our own power, because power demands responsibility. We may fear our own creativity, because creativity demands risk. We may fear our own greatness, because greatness demands sacrifice. In suppressing these potentials, we sabotage ourselves just as much as when we avoid our flaws. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim these disowned aspects, to see that the self is larger, deeper, and more complex than we have allowed ourselves to believe. This confrontation is not comfortable. It feels like standing before a mirror that shows us the beauty and the ugliness of who we are. It requires honesty without excuse, courage without certainty, and patience without promise of quick reward. But this is the path through which sabotage begins to dissolve. Once you have seen the shadow and accepted its presence, it no longer has to manipulate you in silence. You become aware of its strategies, its fears, its disguises, and in that awareness, you gain the freedom to choose differently. Integration is a process of wholeness. Instead of living in fragments, one part striving for growth, another pulling back in fear, you begin to unify. The inner conflict that once drained your energy transforms into alignment. The self that sabotaged no longer acts as an enemy, but as a teacher, guiding you toward the parts of yourself that still need healing, recognition, and acceptance. In this way, what once appeared as failure becomes an invitation to deeper self-knowledge. True success is not the absence of obstacles, but the conscious alignment of your inner world, where the conscious self stops fighting against the unconscious self. Many people imagine success as a path without difficulty, a smooth road where everything falls into place. They think that once they are ready, or once circumstances are right, the struggle will vanish, and they will finally move freely toward their goals. But this image is a fantasy, for obstacles are not external enemies that must be erased. The greatest obstacles are internal contradictions, the silent battles between what we desire consciously and what we resist unconsciously. As long as this conflict remains unresolved, no amount of external opportunity will lead to fulfillment. When your conscious self says, "I want to succeed," but your unconscious whispers, "I am afraid of what success will demand," you create a division within. This division drains energy, scatters focus, and produces patterns of sabotage that appear as failure. You may begin a project with great passion, but the unconscious fear of judgment or loss will slowly erode your commitment. You may achieve a measure of progress, but the unconscious belief that you are unworthy may compel you to retreat. What we call failure is often the visible mark of this unseen war. True success, then, does not come from erasing every challenge, but from bringing these opposing forces into alignment, so that your energy is no longer divided against itself. Alignment begins with awareness. You must recognize the voices that speak within you. The conscious voice is clear, logical, and goal-oriented. It is the part of you that sets intentions, makes plans, and dreams of possibilities. The unconscious voice is older, deeper, and rooted in emotion and instinct. It carries the memory of your wounds, the weight of your fears, and the shadows of your past. When these two voices remain unacknowledged, they clash silently, producing hesitation, procrastination, and self-sabotage. But when you listen deeply and bring these voices into dialogue, a transformation occurs. Instead of conflict, there is understanding. Instead of fragmentation, there is unity. Alignment does not mean that fear disappears or that the unconscious suddenly submits. It means the conscious self learns to work with the unconscious rather than against it. You begin to see that your fears are signals, not enemies, that they point to places within you that still need healing. You recognize that your resistance is not laziness, but that psyche's attempt to protect you from imagined danger. And when you acknowledge these truths, you create space for harmony. Your conscious self can say, "I understand you fear this step, but we will take it together." And the unconscious begins to soften its grip. True success emerges when your energy is no longer wasted in internal struggle. Instead of one part pushing forward while another pulls back, all of you moves in the same direction. Obstacles remain, but they no longer feel insurmountable because the greatest obstacle, the division within, has been reconciled. You meet challenges with focus instead of hesitation, with clarity instead of doubt. Your progress becomes steady not because life has grown easier, but because your inner world has stopped working against itself. This is why so many outwardly successful people remain unfulfilled, because they achieve external victories while remaining fragmented within. Their accomplishments do not bring peace, only further tension, as the unconscious continues to resist what has been ignored. True success is different. It is the state where achievement and inner harmony coexist, where the conscious and unconscious are aligned in purpose. In this space, even difficulties become part of the journey, not threats to it. You stop fearing obstacles because you understand that the real battle is not against the world, but for your own inner unity. When you realize you are not failing, but resisting your own potential, you awaken to freedom. The power to transform sabotage into self-mastery. The idea of failure has long haunted the human spirit, casting a shadow of shame and defeat upon those who struggle. Yet, what if failure is not the true name for what we experience? What if beneath the appearance of collapse lies not weakness, but resistance, an internal hesitation to step into the fullness of who we are? To see this truth is to shift the ground beneath your feet, for it transforms the weight of failure into an invitation to confront the deeper forces within. Resistance is not an external punishment. It is the psyche's way of testing your readiness. Each time you retreat from opportunity, each time you delay action, each time you doubt your worth, it is not the world declaring your inadequacy, but your inner self protecting you from the unknown. You resist not because you are incapable, but because the path forward demands the death of the old self, and the unconscious resists that death with every fiber of its being. Potential always requires transformation, and transformation always feels like loss to the part of you that clings to comfort. What you call failure is simply the visible sign of this resistance. a signal that you are standing at the threshold of becoming. The moment you recognize this, everything changes. You are no longer trapped in the belief that you are doomed to fall short. Instead, you begin to see sabotage for what it is, a message from the unconscious, asking whether you are truly prepared to step into your power. With this recognition, freedom begins to emerge. Freedom is not the absence of fear, nor the erasure of resistance. It is the ability to see clearly what is happening within and to choose consciously instead of unconsciously. You begin to act not as a victim of sabotage, but as its interpreter, turning what once hindered you into a guide. This awakening is the foundation of self-mastery. To master yourself does not mean to silence fear or to destroy resistance, but to integrate them. It means to recognize the voices within you that cling to smallness and to bring them into alignment with the part of you that seeks growth. Instead of denying your resistance, you sit with it, understand it, and guide it. You no longer allow it to dictate your choices in silence, but neither do you pretend it does not exist. In this balance, sabotage is transformed. What was once an invisible enemy becomes a visible companion, one that teaches you where your inner work still lies. Self-mastery is born in this space of awareness and integration. You realize that the energy once wasted in internal conflict can now be channeled into creation, into persistence, into the steady pursuit of your vision. The chains of failure fall away because you see that you were never failing. You were only resisting, hesitating at the edge of your own potential. The obstacles that once seemed impossible become stepping stones, not because they have changed, but because you have. You are no longer divided against yourself. You are whole, and in wholeness lies the power to move forward without sabotaging what you were meant to become.